boy, mate. This is every fist weapon ranked in a more Yankee accent. Sorry about that. Number 14 is the
Caestus.
I hope that was the correct pronunciation. Okay, so first of all, this weapon is not bad. It's just worthless. Why? Because you're watching this video, and I'm going to show you that if you just go over to the Dragon Barrel West Grace, which can be easily reached at the beginning of the game, and just go west up this hill at daytime, do not go at nighttime. I repeat, do not go at night. You'll find a merchant whomst you can purchase thine spiked Caestus from. For half a weight or Miyazaki unit more, the spiked Caestus is literally better in every infusion no matter what your stats are. And just to add on, it has 45 bleed buildup, which the regular Caestus doesn't have. But let's say that you really want to use the regular Caestus. Okay. It's going to be near the bottom for almost every infusion besides a middling performance in the Flame Art, Sacred, Cold, and Occult affinities. It does have a very nice semi-unique heavy attack that can stunlock most staggerable enemies, and if you want to use it in your offhand, it has an average parry, which is mildly worse than a parrying dagger and has way less recovery and duration than a buckler parry, which are both the same weight as the Caestus. So while this isn't a bad weapon and you can easily beat the game with it, it's simply outclassed in every conceivable way. Number 13 is the Clinging Bone. Have you ever wanted someone special to hold your hand? Well, Mr. Skeleton has got you covered. This weapon has a consistently high attack rating with good base damage and strong scaling with Dex and Arcane that can lead it to be around the third highest attack rating among fist weapons. The damage split is highly physical with a little bit of magic, so it benefits a lot from the Blue Dancer charm. It's also the third longest fist weapon, which helps with its Blade Fist moveset, and being able to chain running attacks or combine a running light attack with a tap heavy attack. What holds it back is the Lifesteal Fist weapon skill, which only affects a handful of humanoid enemies. That does include some bosses, but it also doesn't include a lot of enemies that you think it would, which can leave you hanging and not for a high five. This weapon's high physical damage means you could still use it in most situations, but it's almost never going to be your strongest option. Number 12 is the Cipher Pata. As a part of multiple ciphers, I will say with great truthfulness that the CIA has done nothing wrong whatsoever, and that this weapon is a menace to society. It's easy to find as soon as you get into the round table, does fully holy damage, has good range, and only scales with faith. As one of the bladed fist weapons, it has the stabbing run attack, but sadly also shares the claw heavy attack, which you may enjoy, but I find it can be kind of clunky at times. To top it off, the weapon skill is an impaling thrust reskin that does a staggering 30 poise damage. Theoretically, this would make it very good as a starting weapon for faith builds. It has some direct synergy with holy damage increases, which can also affect your spells, and its damage scales very well with faith. But there are a couple of problems. First, the total attack rating is always near the bottom of the fist weapon category. Sure, at higher levels of faith, it catches up to the lower attack rating faith infusions like the Katar and the Pata, where its full holy damage might give it an edge. But that leads to my second point. All of those infusible sacred weapons can also be infused with fire, which a lot of enemies are weak to. And those enemies that are weak to fire are often strong against holy, the sole damage type of the Cipher Pata. In conclusion, this is more of a side weapon that you would use against enemies that are weak to holy damage. Number 11 is the Grafted Dragon. Bear. Witness. This is the only non-paired fist weapon, and I know I'm not the only one who is disappointed by that, but I guess it makes sense for the boss that you get it from. Though the real shame is you can't even two-hand the weapon either, so it's mainly stuck as an offhand, or you can be a Chad and say screw the rules, I have New Game Plus, and just equip 2 of these Dragon Fists. Sure, you still only have the basic one-handed heavy attack, but this weapon has good damage with just its base stats, and skills to have the most attack rating when you have more stats. It also does 10% more damage against dragons, and 5% more damage against ancient dragons. The weapon skill is explosive with a bunch of fireballs that create tons of fire spots on the ground. This makes the weapon skill much stronger against big enemies and any enemies that are weak to fire damage, which is important because this weapon category suffers from a massive lack of infusible fire ashes of war. Just don't forget to ask your mom what else I've been dragging across the ground. My feet, because I have anxiety. Number 10 is the Matting Hand. Arg, this weapon will drive ye enemies madder than a league player a-feedin'. Now, said madness doesn't work on any enemies besides Tarnished, but this weapon has a lot to make up for it. First, it shares one of the best heavy attacks in the game, with each one of these hammer fist attacks doing 33 stance damage. For reference, someone like Melania has 80 stance, meaning it would only take 3 of these charged heavy attacks to break her stance. For the attack attack rating, it starts out low, but the quad scaling really picks up as you get more stats, making this one of the higher damage fist weapons. The damage split is about 60% fire and 40% fizz, so it also scales really well with fire damage increases, though these types of damage splits are always a double-edged sword, as lots of enemies are strong against fire damage. The weapon skill applies about 305 madness buildup, does somewhat equivalent damage to the charged heavy, but only does 15 stance damage, meaning that in PvE, the charged heavy is going to be what you're spamming. Number 9 is the Iron Ball. Unlike the Caestus, these do have a direct use during the game. You find them on the corpse of this kind shrimp vendor at the Boil Prawn Shack Grace. Just don't tell him who fries the rice around here. From there, you could basically use these for the couple of bosses before you gain access to Landel. They share probably the most effective heavy attack in the game, so just spam that and they can make short work of anything in your path. But after you get to Landel, you just have to see this huge coliseum and go around the left side until you find the Starfist, which is better than the Iron Ball in every conceivable way besides an extra half a weight unit. Can you still use it and roleplay as a pirate with cannonball hands?
Aye, matey. This weapon can keyhole your ass through the game.
So it's moderately more useful, but still a massive piece of shit. Number 8 is Thiollier's Hidden Needle. This weapon turns any enemy into an EP kitten, which you could then explode. But in reality, this weapon builds eternal sleep when you attack with it, including with the weapon skill. This stuns an enemy for 10 seconds before the purple mist turns light purple and they can be awoken on damage taken, though some enemies will also just shake their head and wake back up. Against Tarnished, both sleeps will stun for about a second, with Eternal Sleep draining more FP. If you use the weapon skill while they're affected by Eternal Sleep or regular sleep, they will explode, dealing pretty substantial damage. But this weapon isn't just about knocking people out. It's also a solid dex int weapon with okay range. That helps when you can't knock your enemy out as they are somehow immune to sleep, which happens to be the case for almost half the enemies you face. In such cases, this weapon wouldn't be as useful as, say, a Magic Starfist or a Cold Spiked Caestus, but it still makes you go, ooh woo, nonetheless. Number 7 is the Katar. As you've seen, this weapon category has a sad history of fist weapons that are basically downgrades in every way, and the Katar is no exception. With the introduction of the Pata, the Katar has been relegated to early game duty, before you could kill Moog and access the DLC, at least. Because that's when you get the Pata. Right above the starting spot, actually. In the meantime, the Katar has a couple nice things about it. It's one of the only infusible blade fist weapons, meaning it's still a lot more flexible than the other ones. It does have mostly middling damage, unless it's a bleed poison infusion while you have high dex. And it has okay range, being around the same size as the Cipher Pata. But the worst part is that if you infuse this weapon, you lose access to the Impaling Thrust weapon skill that it comes with, as you could not apply that ash to fist weapons. They even did the same thing to the Pata. I guess this means that if you want to do a no infusions playthrough, the Katar could be uniquely useful. Number 6 is the Veteran's Prosthesis. This weapon is the equivalent of beating up an old man and then stealing his peg leg because you think it would make a cool bat. And in all honesty, it does. With just its required stats, it has a pretty high attack rating, but once you level more strength and dex, it shoots straight to the top. The only weapon that can catch up is the Grafted Dragon if you level Faith. The Ash of War has two parts, one with more physical damage and one with more lightning damage. While the stance damage it does is dependent on if the weapon itself hits the target, it'll consistently do around 25 to 35 stance damage. It does have the benefit of being the second longest fist weapon, so it has a strong blade fist running attack, but it's still stuck with the claw heavy attack that only does about 15 stance damage, meaning it's often better to just go for some running attacks into a tap heavy attack or just light attacks. Number 5 is the Poisoned Hand. Some say it's the result of digging a little too deep in one's posterior. In other words, is this weapon actually made of shit? Well, it's definitely not the best, but if you only level Arcane, it does do more damage than pretty much every other poison infused fist. This on top of having access to deadly poison on its basic attacks and its weapon skill, which has a poison buildup that scales with Arcane to insane levels. For example, at just 60 Arcane, the weapon skill will build 415 deadly poison. For those that don't know, Deadly Poison basically deals double damage on every proc, but only lasts for 30 seconds, compared to the 90 seconds of regular poison. However, the lower duration is actually a good thing, because when this weapon is in the vicinity of poison being inflicted, it gives a 7.5% attack power increase for 20 seconds. This stacks with the Mushroom Crown and the Kindred of Rot's Exaltation, which also lasts 20 seconds. So while regular poison would only be able to proc these effects once every 90 seconds, Deadly Poison can proc them every 30 seconds. Combined with the Hammer Fist heavy attack being great at building status effects, you have a recipe for a real shit sandwich. The weapon's sole downside is that it only scales with Arcane, so if you're leveling multiple damage stats, this weapon will become less useful comparatively. Number 4 is the Spiked Caestus. 10 weapons have passed, and where did that bring you? Back to this fucked up pronunciation. In short, this weapon simply kicks ass. It does about equivalent damage to the Katar at the beginning of the game, but scales much harder with stats, ending up at around the top end of most infusions. It has a semi-unique charged heavy that does a little less damage than the basic Hammer Fist charged heavy, with the first heavy attack doing similar stance damage, and the second heavy attack doing a little bit more stance damage with a little bit longer animation. Of course, the bleed buildup really helps with how many attacks this thing gets off, and this weapon has a really strong cold infusion, meaning stacking status effects is this fist's forte. Number 3 is the Golem Fist.
Me like Hulk hands. Parents never buy for Christmas. Thank Miyazaki for rock hand. Now all will pay.
This weapon generally gets the highest attack rating among infusible fist weapons, no matter what your stats are. Though with more stats, the difference does get a bit more noticeable. It pays for this attack rating bonus with not being buffable, which doesn't sound too bad until you realize it's actually fucking terrible. For instance, if you infuse the Starfist with Cragblade, the Golem Fist with way more scaling from stats loses out on total attack rating to the Starfist. The heavy attack does a little less stance damage than the equivalent heavy attack from the Caestus, but gets a lot more status buildup, and there's only one heavy attack, meaning you don't have to worry about the slow triple attack along with shooting out rock fists that work with the smithing talisman, but it's still much slower than the Hammer Fist heavy attack. Number 2 is the Pata. The Pata does a lot of things. Because of its range, it's a disgusting PvP menace. But how much does this help PvE? Well, range is range, and it only multiplies how good the Blade Fist running attack is. For most infusions, this weapon does middling damage, which only gets relatively worse the more stats you get. But the range, combined with said damage, usually means you can get more hits off on average. The heavy attack is okay with how long this weapon is, but I'm not a huge fan of the Blade Fist charged heavy. It takes a lot of time to get out and usually has half the stance damage of the other fist weapon heavy attacks. All in all, because of its massive range, this weapon is the best option for sprint attack spam and a really solid option for light attacks. So if you ever find yourself missing a lot of attacks on a boss while using other fist weapons, you might want to try this one out and know true power. And number 1 is the Starfist. For once, I have nothing stupid to say. This weapon is just so broken that it can literally do anything you want. At low stat levels, it gets either equivalent or has a little less attack rating than the Golem Fist for every infusion besides a superior blood and poison infusion. This makes it, along with its low stat requirements and inherent bleed buildup, extremely optimal for a rune level 1 run. As the stats get higher, it stays at number 2 for every infusion besides Flame Art, Sacred, and Cold, which the Spiked Caestus pulls ahead in. However, the Spiked Caestus doesn't have the Hammer Fist heavy attack, which as I said before is disgustingly fast, does high damage, and 33 stance damage per charged heavy. This combined with the Cragblade Ash of War, which increases physical damage by 15% and stance damage by 10%, means every boss is Omayawamo Shinde Rude. Because this weapon can be buffed and the Golem Fist can't, it also means that everything I said about it being right behind the Golem Fist is pure fabrication, and that it's actually ahead of the Golem Fist for every infusion. So if you've ever wanted to murder someone, breaking kneecaps has never been this easy.
Just don't piss off Dawn, and you'll be okay.
And that's the list. If you liked this video, consider subscribing and checking out this other video that you might enjoy. Toodles.
Why are you running? Why are you running?